Deep within the Lascaux cave, in a 16-foot pit known as the Apse, lies one of the rarest depictions of a human being in prehistoric art. A man lying supine next to a bird perched on a stick. To the modern sleep researcher, this 18,000-year-old imagery suggests a dreamer and his dream, with the bird serving as a metaphor for the mind's ability to take flight while the body remains inert. In ancient Egypt, this was the Ba, the soul bird. This persistent intuition, which I call the premonition of dualism, is the ancient feeling that the stuff of our thoughts belongs to a realm fundamentally different from the lowly matter of our bodies. For most of the 20th century, this free-flying intuition was precisely why consciousness was banned from the laboratory. It was viewed as a fuzzy, ill-defined domain that threatened scientific rigor. In 1962, George Miller, a founding father of cognitive psychology, even proposed an official decade-long ban on the word. It was not until the late 1980s that neuroscience began to dismantle this taboo. By distilling the research of Stanislas Dehaene, we can finally move past ancient bird metaphors and decipher how the brain codes our thoughts. Consciousness has finally entered the lab. 2. Descartes was more of a scientist than you think. It is fashionable in modern neuroscience to bash René Descartes for his dualism. However, Descartes was actually a pioneering reductionist and a visionary theoretical modeler. He conceived of the body as a self-sufficing nervous mechanism, or a hydraulic brain, where animal spirits, a special fluid, were pumped through pipes and reservoirs to generate action. He was a scientist who sought a mechanical basis for everything from digestion to sleep. I desire that you consider that all the functions that I have attributed to this machine, such as the digestion of food, the beating of the heart, waking and sleeping, the retention or imprint of these ideas in the memory, follow in this machine simply from the disposition of the organs, as wholly naturally as the movements of a clock or other automaton follow from the disposition of its counterweights and wheels. Descartes only resorted to dualism because of a logical wall he could not scale. As a scientist, he could not conceive of a mechanical arrangement flexible enough to mimic two specific human functions: the composed use of language and the ability to act in all occurrences of life through reason rather than pre-programmed reflexes. He concluded it was morally impossible for a machine to possess such diversity. Descartes' original challenge, how a physical machine can reflect upon its own state, remains the central hurdle for neuroscience today. 3. The invisible gorilla. Why your brain is a master of deception. We are terrible witnesses to our own lives. To turn this subjectivity into a lab science, we first had to establish a taxonomy. The modern science of consciousness distinguishes between vigilance, the state of wakefulness, attention, the selective filtering of information, and conscious access, the entry of a specific piece of information into awareness. The brain is a master of filtering. In the famous invisible gorilla study, participants focus on counting basketball passes and miss a man in a gorilla suit. Even more shocking is change blindness, exemplified by the detective movie Whodunit. In this film, a viewer watches a 1-minute scene while 21 major elements, including a stuffed bear being replaced by a medieval suit of armor, are swapped in plain sight. Most people miss nearly every change. To study this, scientists utilize 3 core ingredients. 1. Defining conscious access as the specific phenomenon of reportable awareness. 2. Experimental manipulation, such as masking, where a word is sandwiched between geometric shapes to compare the neural fate of seen versus unseen stimuli. 3. Taking subjective reports as raw data, treating a participant's "I didn't see it" as a genuine mental event that requires an objective neural explanation. 4. Your unconscious is smarter than you are. The subliminal self is not a collection of simple reflexes. It is a sophisticated processor that operates beneath the surface of the executive board. Research reveals that high-level cortical areas fire intensely even when we have no subjective experience of the stimuli. The brain unconsciously performs reading and language. The fusiform gyrus, the visual word form area, identifies words and their meanings even when they are masked. Arithmetic, the parietal lobe, responsible for our number sense, can unconsciously compute the average of several hidden numbers or prime the brain for math. Error detection. The anterior cingulate cortex activates when we make a mistake, even if we are unaware of the error ourselves. Complex game strategy. Expert chess players can unconsciously recognize if a king is under check from a masked image. Intuition and valuation. In Bechara's gambling task, participants' palms sweat in anticipation of a bad deck long before they consciously realize the risk. As Henri Poincaré observed, the subliminal self is in no way inferior to the conscious self. It is not purely automatic. It is capable of discernment. It knows better how to divine than the conscious self, since it succeeds where that has failed. 5. The brain as a Bayesian statistician. The Hens theory suggests the brain operates as a Bayesian statistician, where an army of unconscious workers performs probabilistic calculations to interpret ambiguous data. In the aperture problem, individual neurons see only fragments of a scene, but the brain integrates these signals to find the most likely interpretation. This is most visible in binocular rivalry. When each eye sees a different image, the brain does not see a blur. It samples one image at a time. Consciousness acts like a discrete measurement device that causes the underlying probability distribution of interpretations to collapse into a single, stable, conscious brief. This sampling is an evolutionary necessity. An organism cannot act on a 50% probability of a predator's location. It must make a discrete decision. Alea iacta est. The die is cast. 6. The bridge across time. Why consciousness evolved. If the unconscious is so powerful, what is consciousness good for? The answer lies in temporal stability and massive sharing. Subliminal information is evanescent and fades in less than a second. Consciousness, however, allows information to be maintained and pondered across time. This is proven in conditioning experiments. In delay conditioning, where a tone and an air puff overlap, the brain learns the association unconsciously. But in trace conditioning, where a temporal gap separates the two, only conscious subjects can bridge the silence. This is the role of the global neuronal workspace. This physical infrastructure consists of giant cells whose long axons crisscross the cortex, interconnecting the brain into an integrated whole. Information is broadcast across this workspace, making it available for logic, language, and long-term planning. As William James noted, the particulars of the distribution of consciousness, so far as we know them, point to its being efficacious. 7. Conclusion. The future of the self. We are now identifying the signatures of consciousness, reproducible patterns of brain activity, like the P3 wave that signal the ignition of the global workspace. This has profound medical implications for locked-in patients, allowing us to determine if a silent body still houses an active mind. However, this science also challenges our sense of agency. If our brains are freewheeling machines that constantly propose spontaneous, partly random unconscious samples for the workspace to evaluate, what is the I? Perhaps the conscious self is less like a king and more like a spokesperson, an entity that selects and reports the winning sample from the unconscious depths. If our minds are an uninterrupted flow of these proposals, we must ask, to what extent are we the deliberate authors of our own stream of consciousness, and to what extent are we merely the first to hear what our brains have to say?